welcome to the podcast. I'm Jake Brown, and with me today I have got
Helen Bates,
Gareth Davies,
Lee Barneycott,
and it's episode 18, I believe, guys.
ED Govcast episode 18. That is crazy. Nearly, 2 years we've been doing this?
You can do the maths.
That's a good point.
Yeah, well.
So that was good that we managed to share that audio, and I apologise. Like most of us, we're not that used to using Zoom, I suppose. More likely to be using Teams these days. But yeah, so hosted by myself, Helen Bates. She's also a paediatric emergency physician based with me. Lee Barneycott, who's also a pre-hospital emergency physician based in the Hampshire Isle of Wight, and Jake Brown, who's also works with NICE. So a good team of people. So I guess the journey and what led me to actually creating this podcast in the first place. So I was given the unenviable task of becoming the governance lead for the department in September 23. And to be fair, I'm sure you can all see this, that a lot of our meetings weren't well attended. It was mostly a few consultants, some of the senior nurses, but the people on the ground weren't really hearing the message. And I was quite clear that there was a wider audience that would benefit from some of the clinical pearls that we discussed. And there was also lots of great work being done by the multidisciplinary team that wasn't really being put out there. And clearly, I just wanted to make it a bit cooler. And as we all know, sometimes clinical governance can be a bit dull. And I wanted to try and make it a bit cooler. And obviously, I wanted to be a bit different because up until I'd taken over, Teams meetings, face-to-face meetings, that was it really. There wasn't anything else out there. We thought about a newsletter, but that wasn't really that cool. So thought about something else, maybe a podcast. The problem with podcasts are there's quite a lot of them, and they're really good. So EM Crit, for example, that's one of the US guys. That really, really excellent podcast. The Resus Room, one of my favorites. That's really great. St. Emmeline's, Archem. It's saturated. The market is saturated. So we need to do something different with this media. And as I was aware at the time, I didn't think there was anything out there that specifically talked about sort of clinical governance problems and sort of an M&M style presentation. So as I've mentioned, they are real life cases, and it's a group of us ED consultants discussing real life cases. It's learning focused. So, we're talking about key learning points, key nuggets, pearls, whatever you want to call them, and getting that out there to everybody to listen to. And there's 4 of us, so there's always going to be a difference of opinion, and you see that on the shop floor day to day. So it's a light-hearted environment, so clearly there's a few jokes, and we discuss cases sort of in that format. And it's supposed to mirror that sort of micro-teaching that you might expect to see on the shop floor, on those sort of shop floor sort of little nuggets and little pearls that you might get out of your seniors. So it is a condensed version of our monthly clinical governance meeting, but we don't really sell it as that. We don't say, this is the Hampshire Hospital's clinical governance meeting. It is just a sort of M&M style clinical case scenario discussion, mixed in with a few other things. For example, over the months and years, we've talked about QI, things like that. So there's a lot of stuff out there. It's not too long, so it's about 40 minutes. Sometimes they're a bit shorter, sometimes they're a bit longer. So it's ideal for a podcast format to listen in the car. It's a bit surreal listening to myself if I'm driving in, but I do that occasionally to check that everything's fine. And it's available on all of the podcast apps. And obviously, we've got a catchy theme tune. Yes, we know that clinical governance can be a bit dull. Let's get a podcast out there. Now, the problem was, like a lot of people, I had no clue how to create a podcast. I didn't have a Scooby-Doo. So luckily, these days, you can find out quite quickly how to do things by Googling, and that's essentially what I did. So I think the first thing you need to probably think about getting is getting some equipment. Now, I did buy the equipment myself, and I'll go through a few of the costings behind it. And that's me and my son and my daughter actually recording the first episode of ED Govcast, although it wasn't really styled as that. It was October, I believe, so we were talking about Halloween and ghosts, but just checking the equipment was working, and they were well happy with that. So what you need really is a recording device, something to store the audio on. So I literally just bought this off Amazon. This was the recommended one for a starter podcast. called a PodTrack P4. And as you might see at the top, there's plugins for mics and plugins for headphones. And then it's literally just stored on a little SD card. And then you just then download the audio down onto your PC. You need some headphones and some microphones. Again, just bought that off the internet. So they're about £100 each. So we're talking probably about £500, £600 to get some decent kit. But I've been using these now since we started, about a year and a half, 2 years, and there's been no issue whatsoever. So definitely recommend that. And then you need a way of getting that out there and a way of editing it. So I use Alitu. There's clearly lots and lots out there you can use, but that's essentially a platform that you take your audio into. It's got its own editing suite, and then you publish it, and then that will link it out to Apple, for example, and Spotify, and all of the other podcast formats. I find that the most difficult problem, actually, like a lot of things that we try to do, is actually getting people in a room and actually finding a room. So this was around Christmas time, and it took us ages to get that room to set everything up and then record it. But actually, more recently, we've just moved to Lee's house, so we now record it in Lee's house. So occasionally you get a sort of, he's got a nice cockapoo, small little puppy that occasionally gets in on the podcast. So we just call him the ED Govcast podcast dog. So you might hear him. So like everything that we do, there's got to be some kind of rules around what we do. So obviously we can't really be specific about patients for all sorts of reasons, including medical confidentiality. But we kind of really need to kind of avoid age and demographics and make it as general as we can, so nobody can really identify who they are, and don't really mention where they went and etc. And also, these are generally our opinions and our takes on that particular presentation and how we manage them. So we always invite our audience to go away and consult their own guidelines. And that's just a little warning that we usually put in before and after. And if you listen to a lot of podcasts now, they're all doing that. So if you have listened, then, or if you're a dad, you might have been guilty of producing the old dad joke, certainly around Christmas time. But we like to put some in. And actually, Helen Bates, our resident pediatric emergency physician, says it's quite important because it then gives you some information and some jokes, to some material to go away and talk to children while they're in the emergency department and break the ice. So I think it's actually quite essential. The credibility bit, so we are all consultants, so I guess we should know what we're talking about, but the reason we're talking about them is because they're either rare or there's a significant learning point to it. And so it's definitely, I learn a lot by doing it myself. And you need a bit of a jingle, don't you, for a lot of these things. So another thing to consider, for example, is branding. So it took a little while to get a little logo, and there's various websites and platforms you can do that on. And a lot of kind of ideas around what we're going to call the podcast, for example, and what it looks like. You need to advertise it. So we've actually got one of our resident doctors who is our sort of social media guru. And I would definitely recommend involving as many people as you can in this. Certainly resident doctors or anybody in the healthcare team who wants to get involved can help. And that then really is good for them as well. And getting people in a room is always an issue for any sort of meeting, and it's no different for this. So I guess steps to an episode. Well, as I've said before, you need to agree a date to meet. I was finding now we've got a little WhatsApp group, so we try and fit it in when we can. Agree on the content. So for us, really, the content comes from our monthly meetings. So, and a lot of this content is being put out there by various people in the multidisciplinary team, for example, resident doctors, and any sort of things that happen or things that don't go so well that get investigated. Then we try and dig out the learning from that. We record the segments, so sometimes we say things we shouldn't say, so it needs a lot of editing. There's There's lots of ums and ahs that even now I'm probably doing. But you know, sometimes you're never going to get that perfect edit. So I think when we first started, I was quite fixated on removing every and ah, and I've just realized that probably not necessary. And then you save your recordings. A few times I thought I'd lost them, but luckily I haven't done that yet. Upload to your platform of choice. So as I've said, I use Alitu, and then comes the editing, and then the publish. So far, we're not a massive podcast. We probably says we're about over 2,000 downloads over the last 18 months. So I would take that as a win. People definitely are listening to it, but certainly it's not as well known or listened to as some of the mainstream podcasts, for example, the Resus Room. But certainly there are listeners out there. We have spread across the whole world, though I do think some of these listeners are just some of my colleagues going on holiday. But as you can see, the most predominant are in the UK, as you might expect, but we've also spread across the US, and we've moved into Brazil, and quite a few in Egypt. As I've said, we're across all the platforms, so Spotify, Apple, anywhere really, or you can just type us into Google and you'll find us. So I will just play a little bit more for you, and hopefully there won't be any hiccups this time.
Put our teeth in and talk about flow-ins. We've got such an interesting case on Guillain-Barré.
Yeah, totally.
Honestly, neurology doesn't really float my boat, but this case,
I think
Fascinating.
it's the first for the podcast talking about
GBS.
GBS.
Can I just remind everyone at home that the stuff we're talking about today is our take on it, and we would encourage you to look at your own local policies and guidelines and come up with your own interpretation where necessary.
So the first case we're going to talk about is a trauma case. So Pamela, our very lovely senior registrar in the emergency department, presented a case which she entitled, just have to get the slide up, A Cause for C-Spine Concern. So she presented a case where one of our HEMS paramedics brought in a 63-year-old motorcyclist who'd come off his bike.
There we go. So a little taster for you. So I guess in conclusion, I think like most things that are new, there's going to be a big learning curve. And I would recommend that you probably don't listen to the first two podcasts because it doesn't sound as cool as the last one. But all of the information that you need really is out there to look up and find out. You need to understand your content and what makes it different. So for us, it's about clinical case analysis and learning nuggets. Get some kit. You know, it's probably not that expensive. You can get cheaper things than I tried, but certainly it was a one-off investment of equipment, and it hasn't let me down during the last 2 years. Get something online editing or publishing suite. There's lots out there. As I said, I chose Alitu because it's really good. Get people in a room and obviously get a catchy theme tune. But then you've got to get the message out there and advertise it. So thank you very much. And if there's any questions, then I'll be happy to answer them.